Much for putting this on too. Yeah, I appreciate it. This is awesome. Right, so the way it's going to work is Landon's going to talk a little bit about his background and give just more in depth on how he does what he does, and then we'll open up the questions, and also Sean and I will also ask him some questions. So after he's done giving his intro, if anyone has any questions, feel free to help him out.
Sweet. Cool. Well, thanks so much for having me. I love visiting UIUC. I believe this is my 5th time on campus. Every time it's been wonderful, especially when you have awesome student hosts showing me around and connecting me with students. But yeah, I think we should break this down into like a few different parts. I can sort of start with like my origin story, and then we can sort of go into the drive story. And then the third bucket, I'm happy to really share my exciting insights about Chicago. And then, yeah, well, if you guys ever have questions, like just interrupt because I talk a lot. But yeah, so I'm from California initially, even though I've become sort of the quote unquote mayor of Chicago. Born and raised in Oakland, California. That's where all my family is for the most part still. Moved to Chicago for college. I went to DePaul. Didn't know anybody in Illinois, in the Midwest, in Chicago. And I really felt like because I didn't have any family or friends like in this place, like this is the moment where I should just start to absorb as much information as possible, try different things, just figure out what I loved and what I didn't love in my 20s. So that was sort of the goal early on. Ended up having 10 internships in college at many places like the Chicago Tribune, worked at a law firm for a little bit, media companies, marketing companies. I got to work at Motorola, which I did full-time as well, post-grad, when I was an intern at the start. And then also at Cameo. So all in all in college, I had 10 internships, just like trying to really figure it out. That's a huge sort of, motto of mine. Like you got to do a bunch of shit in your 20s. No one starts their college career in their 20s by like, for the most part, at least you shouldn't, like knowing exactly like this is what I want to do for the rest of my life. I think it really starts by having a lot of interest in your 20s. And then from your interests, you can have those sort of turn into obsessions, and then the obsessions from that, you can really see what becomes your passion. So I think from a lot of the early experiences I did, if I sort of think about like what they had in common, it was a lot of sales, storytelling, marketing. But yeah, Cameo was like one of their first interns. It was awesome. I found out about Cameo initially because I was freelance marketing, doing marketing work at a bar in Chicago, and the owner was like, "How do we, increase foot traffic?" And Cameo was like just lightly sort of buzzing in Chicago, and we got a cameo of Charlie Sheen, and like this became like one of the hottest places to go to in the Lincoln Park area. So right there, I was like, okay, like this company is building something super neat. They were still in 1871 at the time, which is like a local accelerator. But I was like, shit, like I got to do whatever I can to like get in with that company. So I just started to like work backwards towards that, and ended up like working out really well. And at Cameo, that was like the first time I ever heard about venture capital. We had our investors that would always come into the room from Planner Perkins and from Starting Line, Chicago Ventures. And that's when I first started to figure out like what a venture capitalist does for founders. And that just always seemed like much more interesting to me because founders have to like lock into one thing for 10 plus years, like power to the founders for doing that. But an opportunity to work across many different industries, support many different founders, like that was pretty interesting to me. So from that point, I started to like craft backwards, like how I can get into venture. And the best advice I have for people trying to get into venture capital is you got to do the work before you have the job. Like no one cold applies into venture, let alone like many industries. Like it's difficult to cold apply into these industries. I think you should always like try and meet people first. Like different investors or whatever like that job is that you're going after, see ways that you can provide value to different functions of that company or like an investor, whatever it is. And I did that by bringing founders to investors, and then also sort of locking in on like these areas like the creator economy, where I can become like an early expert in this space, so that investors, I'd be the first call that they make when they want insights and sort of like need to understand like trends, like how these industries are moving. So do the work before you have the job. That's my best advice for how I got into venture. But like I think that that advice could be relevant to many different industries. A way that I did this at scale though, I did start my media company and podcast. It's called In Their 20s. I was interviewing successful business leaders about what they did in their 20s. So I had like Steve Wozniak, the co-founder of Apple, on. I had Ed Williams, the co-founder of Twitter. I had Beto O'Rourke, like while he was running for president. So we sort of expanded even like outside of business leaders. Had like Jason Calacanis and David Sachs from the All In podcast. I ended up working for Jason for a year in between Cameo and Venture because, all from the podcast, so that turned into a whole other opportunity. I had over 110 episodes weekly that I was putting out. I saw a stat before I started that 90% of podcasts quit after episode 3. I was like, shit, well, if I just get to the 4th one, like I'm already closer to the 1%. So I think I learned a lot about consistency and like just access, to people. Like people are more willing to talk than you would ever, realize. I think we get scared or frightened a lot. Like it's difficult to reach out to this person. Like I learned from Cameo and the podcast that you could really get to anybody from just a cold email. So I wish that was something that was taught in schools, like how to master the art of the cold email. Just keep it short, simple, value-driven. But I had some really cool guests on the podcast. And that sort of, before we go into the second bucket of like what Drive is, I think that's sort of like my origin story. If you have any questions or other folks.
And I have a couple questions, but if anyone else has one first, we can start with the audience.
What college are you?
DePaul. Yep.
What do you study?
I studied public relations, marketing, and advertising.
How did that kind of help you bring the podcast into your first?
Yeah, from the PR perspective, I mean, it's just all about sort of like brand building / like reputation management. So like using the podcast as a way for folks to like share, their stories that they never shared before and like, even build up their platforms better and larger. I think that was a huge advantage I had. Advertising like helped a lot, with sort of like how we branded and marketed the assets we put out in the podcast. And then marketing itself sort of like, how do we take this idea of a podcast and sort of turn this into an overall media business? So, we had a lot of different programming and internships running underneath the podcast. We had a lot of different partnerships with a lot of, well-recognized brands in Chicago. So that sort of helped me like figure out like, the marketing / business engine of the podcast. Yes.
Podcast. Talk to about all the
Yeah. Or like the common things.
it's like
Yeah, I love this question because I reflect on it often. Over 110 episodes, majority being, entrepreneurs. I think majority of the guests I had on the show, like, created something. They built something in their 20s. When a lot of their friends, peers, classmates, parents, family, like, were like, what the hell are you doing? Like, that's stupid. It's never going to work. And I think the common trait is that all of my people, or guests on the show, they didn't fear failure. Like, they just went out and did shit, like, whether or not like they envisioned it to turn into a multi-billion-dollar thing or, they just want to take a risk. So they didn't fear failure. I think that's A. B, like they were all consistent in one way or another with what they did, their work ethic. Like they were constantly putting out, some sort of idea, experimenting on their companies, trying new things, speaking to new people. So a lot of experimenting, a lot of consistency in their 20s. And, the third, I think, wraps it up to sort of what I mentioned earlier. Like they did a lot of shit in their 20s. They tried and had a lot of interest to figure out what their passion would be. So all in all, you got to just do a lot. If you have a little idea to start a business, like what are you waiting for? Just do it. Just start it out. Even if it doesn't work out, like failure is sometimes the greatest lesson of like what you shouldn't do. And like maybe that failure, quote unquote, will like turn into another project. The podcast that I had, and I was just telling the last group, I didn't go out initially and say like I want to start a podcast. Podcast was actually sort of created from like 2 previous things that I started. I initially started a streetwear fashion marketplace connecting local streetwear designers and consumers. So that was the initial plan when I was like a junior in college. Worked at that for a little bit. Really felt like I needed to understand the designer better, like my customer. So started to run a bunch of interviews, like customer interviews, to really understand like how I can build the perfect product for them. And that turned into a documentary series. I was like, whoa, like these are actually like good ass user interviews. Like these are cool people. Like maybe like I just like, sort of turned this into a documentary series because these stories need to get heard. So I had a whole team. This sort of bled into senior year. We had a location. I was working on this for 4 months. So we had like 12 streetwear designers that we were going to sort of record their stories and use this even as a way to like sort of launch the marketplace. And then COVID happened. And I was like, I went back home to California for 4 months. And I didn't know it was going to be 4 months. I didn't know how long COVID was going to take. I didn't know. No one knew. And I still had all this energy. Me and my co-founder had all this energy for like interviewing. It's like we just ran all these test interviews, and we were really about to start with the first one on set, on location, COVID. So we were like, wow, like what if we created another interview series where like we could still take a lot of those lessons, and like we interviewed designers like on Zoom, and then we were like, we have such a perfect location in mind for these, like don't know if it would do it justice like to do it over Zoom. But then that sort of transformed into, like what if we interviewed like business leaders, like because a lot of 20-somethings are like struggling, like so confused on what they need to do right now. Like remember 2020 was like one of the craziest times ever. So we were like, maybe we should interview business leaders like before they became rich and famous, because also no one's talking about that with them. It's always like what their stock's doing today and like how much money they have today. Like maybe they'd love to reflect, and like Zoom's so easy to scale. So that's what birthed in their 20s. The point I was making is that I would have never gotten there in their 20s, which got me into venture, got me into all these other things, if not for like just trying new things, experimenting. So I think you got to try new things. Sometimes, it's very difficult to know, like, I'm going to do exactly this in 10 years. But it's better to like set yourself up many different paths, and then you'll start to really lock in on like, okay, this makes sense. Yes.
So actually, I tried a similar podcast where I would interview business owners. I didn't have much success with it because it was difficult to get in front of these important people who are very busy. Do you have any advice for getting time out of and getting in front of these people who are very important and also very busy at the same time?
Yep. Yeah. A few things. I think like being very clear with the ask. Like, these folks don't just want to feel like they're being reached out to like on a random list. I would try to be very like intentional with my cold emails. And saying like, I interviewed 3 of your friends or people in your network, and I want to talk about your personal experience or days at, like this college, like just, wow, this person already went on my LinkedIn and like did light research, like a very curated cold email. And I think the same advice is for a podcast as for like going to get a job, like trying to be very specific. Because I can tell when founders reach out to me and it's like, oh, I'm just a part of a larger list. Like some founders even mess up my name. Those are always funny, and like make it more obvious. But yeah, the ones that are very specific, it starts with the subject line. Like just being very like clear, concise. So I really learned that, and directive like sort of like I want it to be 25 minutes. We're gonna go over these points. I already have it all mapped out. This is why I want to interview, etc. Like I just kept it so clear. When I started, it was a lot of cold email. That was like the first tier in their 20s. And then it sort of moved over to like, okay, I had this person on, and then they loved it. They loved their experience. They're like, oh my God, I got to tell my friend about this. You got to interview my friend. So then I had like a lot of people sort of like, connecting people for me. And then it moved over to this thing where like these folks were like reaching out to me, like, can I join? Like just cold. They were reaching out to me cold. So I was like, wow, like all from just being consistent and like not giving up. And I had a lot of people initially say no, reach back out in 6 months. I would put that on my calendar and like reach out on the T, and I'd be like, hey, reaching out 6 months later. Ed Williams was like that. Twitter. I believe it like took a year. It was like 2 of those 6-month emails that like I did it on the T, and then finally I guess he was all like, okay, wow, like clearly I was not a part of a list. Like this guy is very punctual. And I jokingly like still have people today that like reach out like beginning of 2023. In my podcast, I'm no longer doing it, but like I might shoot them a note like or next year, be like, hey, like I didn't forget about this. So yeah, just being consistent and understanding that a no today does not mean a no tomorrow. I think was really important.
Yes, I wanted to ask. So you mentioned at Cameo, right?
Yep.
Well, you said you wore different hats. You had multiple.
Yeah.
Usually, startups still give a lot of responsibility to interns. So you have to build some kind of trust or repertoire with the company.
I actually would argue the complete opposite. I think that startups do give you a lot of, no matter who you are, like you get what you put into it. Like, like, you want to like create something, like you would walk up to the CEO's desk and say, hey, like, I think we should do this. And if you have like good reason for it, like it's backed by data and insights, and yeah, it may be difficult to do this on day one, but like there are things at Cameo that are still being used today that like were just like an idea I had as an intern and got started. So that's actually why I would say like consider startup versus large company. Like I've done both. Large company, things are set in stone already. Like we know how we're doing this. Many people have done it before you, and we're going to do it exactly the same way. And if you have a new idea, okay, like there are a lot of politics. We got to go up to this, sort of person and ask and get approval. We got to get budget. Oh, we already have budget for this quarter. We can't do it till next year. Startups are different. I think that you actually really get to make change. I mean, really immediately in whatever you want to do. And that's actually a great way to get in with a startup. I think like, instead of just cold applying to random startups, like you guys should say, okay, like I'm interested in this space, this space, and then just start like doing your own research on sort of like, startups that are innovating in that space. Maybe like try and see like things that you would suggest or like things that you want to work on, and like go to the founder with that. Like, hey, like I want to work here, and I also like just created a mock website for yours that I think like, I designed a mock website for you. Or like, I want to work for you / I just did this without being told I need to do this, like without even having a job here yet. Those are the types of employees that like I think are a huge asset to startups. Ones who are just doing shit before they have the job. Do the work, you have the job, no goes back to that. And like one of our companies in Chicago had someone that was just obsessed with the idea and like literally like coded a mock website, which ended up becoming our website, and we hired her. So like it was just like, yeah, like that's awesome. Why would you not want to hire someone like that? And even if you don't have a startup doesn't have the budget to bring that person on today, like the second they do, they're going to think of that person. So that's the same way I got into venture. That's the same way that like people get these roles. Because in venture, it's not, you don't get in from cold applying. You got to be sort of the first call that someone makes when they have an opening. So yeah, I think do the work if you have the job. Sorry, what was the other part of the question? Or was it? Okay, cool. Yeah. No, I mean, for sure. Like, I think startups are. There are two things that I can think of off the top of my mind that like, or three that like I did early in my career that were helpful. Like experimenting, trying a lot of things, working for a startup, and doing sales. I think sales has a lot of good skills in sales, like storytelling ability. Like there's sales everywhere. And I know the word sales has like a negative connotation, but like I do really believe everybody should start their career in sales. I sell every day. Everybody sells. Like you're selling something. You're convincing someone on your team to like do this versus that, or a customer to purchase your product. It's all sales. So I think that me working sales across many different organizations, Cameo, I was getting celebrities on the platform. That's how I started at Cameo. That's sales. Motorola, I had like a very complex suite of software solutions that like it was very difficult to understand and articulate. So I had to go above and beyond into like really understanding the customer's pain points and their problems, and then sell them the right solution. Or also meeting with the tech team to like understand why they built this, etc. So like, there's a lot of different things in sales that I really think give you strong skills to do a lot of different things.
Well, to the other question.
How'd you make transition?
Yeah, great. We'll get into the second bucket. That's a great question. Good transition, thank you. So Drive. Drive, we are the largest venture firm between the coasts. That means we're the largest VC that's not in SF or the East Coast. We have about 2.5 billion assets under management, and we're based in Columbus, Ohio. So the story of how we got started. Drive was our founders were initially based in Silicon Valley, actually. So they were investors at Sequoia Capital, which is like super recognized venture firm, one of the first and largest. They built sort of a storied career there. One of them brought LinkedIn to Sequoia, and the other one like closed the deal with this big company called Klarna when he was my age at Sequoia. So like they were killing it. And Chris, the latter one, always talks about when he was my age at Sequoia, he was sitting in his first ever partner meeting. This is a meeting where all the investors sort of meet up and they talk about companies that they're looking at and like to the other investors and like, should we invest in this? Should we not? What questions do we have for that founder? And this was Chris's first ever partner meeting. They found a company that they were obsessed with, like someone at the firm did. And no investor at Sequoia had anything bad to say about the company. Like it was the perfect product, like going after a massive problem. It was, team was great. They had the power to build this. Like everything about it was perfect, as Chris describes it. And the company, the only reason why they didn't invest in the company, I kid you not, was because the company was 8 miles away from the Sequoia office. So that was literally why. It was in Pasadena, California, not in Silicon Valley. And that was sort of like Chris's first aha moment where, wow, like Silicon Valley investors really think that you have to be in this one little area to build a great company. And if you're anywhere else, you're not going to do it. You're not going to build a great company. And there was a time where maybe that could have been true because like all the physical servers were there, like in Silicon Valley. But we moved towards cloud computing, and it sort of said that you don't have to be in Silicon Valley to build a great company. And Chris was all like, wow, like, yeah, what about Chicago and all these other places? And Sequoia were like, no. So finally, Chris and Mark were all like, okay, we're going to go build the premier venture firm between the coasts because clearly no investor cares about things that are happening here. So at the time, we were the largest first-time fund in history. We raised our first fund that was like $250 million. And all of our investors, because venture firms, we have investors that give us money and then we deploy the money into startups. They were all like, hell yeah, like this is such a unique thesis. Yeah, like who is paying attention between the coasts? No one. And that's what we did. So we've continued to scale and grow. And the cool thing about us, we can invest in every single stage of a company, as early as idea on napkin, like founders before they're founders, to their $100 million check in a soon-to-be public company. Like that's rare to have a firm in general that can do that, especially a firm in the Midwest that can do that. But it's still in the same thesis. Like we're looking in areas that other people just are not paying attention to. And that's what makes us special because like UIUC is one of the best universities in the country. You guys are a top AI institute. And I can say the same about like any other schools closer to me, like Northwestern, U Chicago. DePaul is getting there. But for the most part, like, we still have like great, alumnus and faculty and, students going after big things. So my point is like, yeah, like firms, so to this day, Sequoia only has one investment that they've made in Chicago. So we've just continued to like focus on anywhere between the Rockies and the Hudson. And it's continuing to expand. But that's sort of what we call the driveway. And, we want to be sort of the premier venture firm between the coasts, and proud to say that we've become that. So where do I sort of come into this? I'm in Chicago building Drive's office and our pre-seed fund, which means my focus is to keep founders in Chicago because I'm obsessed with Chicago and very bullish on Chicago, and we're a great city. And I'll get to why in a second. That was the third bucket. But so I'm building this office, this pre-seed fund to keep founders in Chicago. Because what if YouTube could have been built in Chicago? What if PayPal could have been built in Chicago? these are all UIUC grads. It's like we're training students to leave, because historically it's been difficult to get early stage capital in Chicago and the Midwest. So we're trying to change that. To keep founders here, to like see more multi-billion-dollar businesses started in Chicago and these other ecosystems. How I found out about Drive? Well, let's backtrack. I was doing a lot of that, like, do the work before you have the job type stuff, using the podcast to do that. I was meeting with a bunch of investors, and I got to really like pick their brains and hear about like what they look for in founders, the types of companies they want to invest in, the value they bring to founders. And then I was also building a huge network of founders, what they're building, why they're building, what problems they're going after. And I started to do the work before I had the job. I wasn't an investor officially, but I just started to connect investors to founders, founders to investors. I did a lot of that. And then in addition, I was leaving Cameo. And I became really obsessed with the creator economy and super fandom and music and a lot of these other spaces that we were adjacent with. So I started to build my own thesis in the space and started to meet with a bunch of creator economy companies just because I was interested in where the industry was going, what trends were happening, and I wanted to become someone that firms could reach out to if they wanted insight on the creator economy. No one was telling me to do it. I wasn't really doing it for money. I mean, not at all. I was really just doing it to, be like that first call. Because as I mentioned earlier, it's never a cold email. Unfortunately, or a cold applying that's going to get you into venture. It's starting to build a relationship first and provide value first. And then I'd say the third thing I did was started to work closer with founders. Not for anything, just to start advising, giving advice. I was really passionate about storytelling and go-to-market strategy and distribution. So I felt okay, that's my skill set. That's what I can help founders with. So I started to do a lot of that. And then the fourth and final, I became someone who knew the most about Chicago and where Chicago was going. Who was investing in Chicago, what was being built in Chicago, where founders were coming from, industries, all of that. Not because anybody told me to do it, just because I felt like that would be a really good asset to founders as well, and investors. So I had all those four things. And at the same time, Drive, they were looking to expand these different cities. And they were looking for someone who had an eye and ear on the street, finger on the pulse, knew where the founders were coming from, knew everything about Chicago, and had the skill set to sort of help founders in the early innings of building their business. So it was just natural. They found each other. So I felt a very specific sort of role that they were looking for. So all that said, never applied to Drive, never applied for a role in venture actually ever. I just knew that from the second I heard about venture for the first time at Cameo, it's a 2.5 year sort of journey of how do I just do it first? And I'm not waiting for someone to hold my hand and say, congrats, you're an investor. I already start doing it. This is gonna really pay off, I know, and just make for a better sense of why someone should bring me onto their team. So do the work before you have the job. And that's not just for VC. I think that could be said for so many different industries. Yes.
So you talked a lot about how you're connecting founders and investors. You also had your podcast where you talk to business owners. And I saw yesterday on LinkedIn that you have thousands of followers on LinkedIn. Can you talk about how you build your personal brand and also how you grow your network to get those connections?
Yes. So I'm no longer working on the podcast because I got everything out of it that I needed to. There was a period of time early into the show where I was whoa, I connected all this. I could use this to get into venture. So it did just that. And still very thankful for the experience. But today, I build my brand in different ways. I have a newsletter, which I love. It's awesome, curating information, sharing insights. It's a weekly publication called The Driver's Seat. It's thedrivechicago.com. Released every Monday at 7 a.m. Now we just got the 32nd edition every single week. And it's on insights. It's Chicago and Midwest Innovation Economy Insights. and events around the city and sort of, my personal thoughts. But what I was just talking to the last group about, like, this is sort of like a hack for founders because I'm very transparent about like what we want to see at Tribe, what industries I'm looking at and what I'm passionate about. It's like, wow, like if you look at this as a founder, like you know how to navigate a conversation much better, me or any investor. So I know that this wasn't really a part of the question, but I recommend that founders, before approaching an investor at random, table stakes is just spending a little time on the website, right? Like find out if that investor is even looking at your space. But you can go even beyond that, like your own version of diligence, and like look at what people or investors are writing about, like speaking about, and what how they're speaking about these industries. Because then you reach out to an investor like, hey, I read your piece on blah blah blah. I'm building blah blah blah, and I want to challenge your point on blah blah blah. Like that's really interesting. That's much better than just like a random block of text, cold email. That again, you're just part of a random list. So I think that's how I've built my brand. Because I'm constantly on the go. Like we're not lazy investors. Like a lot of investors on the coast just expect founders to come to them. And I'm visiting a new campus every week. We're all on the road constantly. It's in our name, Drive. We're all over the place. So we're energized to like find founders where they are. Because that's the whole reason why we exist. Like we're not just expecting people to come to us. You got to also be on the road. You got to also look for these overlooked areas, overlooked founders, like turn over every rock. So that's just sort of like what we do every week. But at the same time, I do have like this top of funnel sort of thing I've built where like, I put out the newsletter and I host a lot of events in Chicago that are very specific and curated. And that does sort of like attract like the type of founders, industry that we're looking for. So yeah, it's a mix of those two things of how I build my brand today.
I had one more question. To backtrack a little bit, talking about your like thesis for like Chicago and the Midwest, I was wondering like why that is, and like why do you think like other investors overlook the region, and like what specifically about the region like creates the next generation of startups? So like what's so special about the Midwest?
Great question, and perfect transition. You guys are great with the transitions today. So why Chicago? Few reasons. When I think about Chicago, I think we really have all the pieces to be a perfect ecosystem. We have stellar talent. Like just looking at talent on university campuses. I spend time in Chicago and Illinois. Like I'm just so impressed and in awe with sort of like the types of ideas you guys are building, sort of things you want to create, and companies you want to work for and provide value to. So we have all the talent on university level, and then also we have all these massive companies. We have like one of the highest concentrations of Fortune 500s in the Midwest, which means a few things. We have people who might be willing to leave their jobs. That's talent, and then also all these enterprises are customers. Like we have a lot of customers that you can go after as a founder, which is pretty cool. We're one of the most diverse economies also in the U.S. Like no one industry takes up over 14% of the overall economy, which means anything can be built in Chicago. I worked at the fastest growing creator economy company in the U.S., and it wasn't built in L.A. It was built in Chicago, which is really cool. So I've seen quantum computing companies, I've seen biotech, robotics, ag tech, food tech. There are a few areas that we do more of, but for the most part, diverse economy. The cost of living comparatively to places on the coast, which it all sort of connects. That means that you get talent for cheaper, than what you would pay for. So your monies go much longer, or further, I should say, in a city like Chicago. And then it's just a damn good city to be in. I mean, like, I love it. The food's awesome. The people are awesome. The activities and things to do. It's a very special city that for sure like gets overlooked. So all of that in mind, we're the third largest city in the U.S., one of the highest GDPs, one of the highest concentrations of billionaires and all this stuff. But like, we got a lot of work to do, like for tech and venture. Big companies have been built in Chicago, like Groupon, Grubhubs, and then you got sort of the newer generations, of course. But for the most part, like we need to be like churning these out more consistently. And I think Chicago being a PE city, a private equity city, unfortunately, like we've been very risk averse. I think you got a lot of founders that are just too like small minded. And then you got a lot of investors that like don't take massive early bets and concentrated bets as they should. They want to wait for traction. They want to wait for like, sort of revenue metrics. And I think like on the coast, like you just get the opposite. In SF, you have people that dream so big, think so big, like they don't want to go get acquired by Google. They want to go kill Google and like build a better Google. You got investors that like are willing to take early bets because they know the qualities that you should be seeing in founders, founders should have. You sort of like how to guide them early. And it just happens over and over and over again. Like your next door neighbor is like someone who built a multi-million-dollar business. So you have these sort of lessons to point to. And it's just rare to have that in the Midwest. We're trying to change that because we have the Silicon Valley mindset. We've built companies from ground floor to public. Everything I say that we want to do in Chicago, like investing in companies at every stage, like we did that in Columbus. Root Insurance was a company that was started in our office in Columbus and is now a public company. Forge Biologics is another company that like was one of our theses that we built. We couldn't find a company that was doing something similar, so we pulled students from a Midwest university, I believe, and it became a unicorn in under 3 years. So like we have the playbook. Like just in Columbus alone, we've invested in 21 companies. We've created 5,000 jobs in Columbus. We've invested $400 million just in Columbus, and that's created over $6 billion in follow-on capital, like just in Columbus alone. So I'd like to say that we've been a catalyst for Columbus, and I think that we could be a catalyst in these other ecosystems. I know that we can be a catalyst in Chicago because it's no excuse like to be this large and have all these pieces. We need founders to dream bigger and think bigger, but at the same time, like investors we need to unlock more early stage capital because we're very risk averse. So my sort of vision is that we're going to be able to create this flywheel where we invest early. We support those companies as they grow. We show them all that Chicago has to offer. And then they're going to become successful, a few of them, hopefully as many as possible. And those early employees are going to go launch their own companies, and they're going to go invest in other companies. It's going to create a legitimate flywheel, which is the same thing. That's not a new idea. It's the same thing that's happened in other ecosystems. SF, as great as it is today, it didn't start great. Like it was Boston. Boston was really like where all the investment was happening. It took early founders like Steve Jobs, Bill Gates, a few of these guys, just massive dreams and like big ambitions and not small-minded, and again, they didn't have a lot to point to. They just had it in themselves. So you got to think big. It took like a major platform shift. Silicon Valley is named that because of the semiconductor. They used that technology to create massive companies. And you had investors that were willing to look early, and they really knew the space as well and said, okay, this is the support and resource that we're going to be able to provide, the platform to help these companies grow. So the OG Sequoias and the Kleiner Perkins. And now you have SF. And the same in New York, I'd argue it wasn't really until 2010, 2011 when New York started to get their flywheel effect going. So we just need that. Like we need the big wins in Chicago that like sort of create a legitimate flywheel. And we get that by going earlier and keeping founders in Chicago. So that's the plan. And that's why I'm inspired because like how rare is it to say that like you were on the ground floor building up like the third largest city, like at least the tech venture ecosystem. Like SF has already done what it's going to do. New York is there. Chicago, again, third largest city. This is sort of a career defining moment, I feel. And my founders in Chicago feel that as well. They're not just building a company, which is as difficult as it is. Like they're moved to like build the ecosystem up, build Chicago. And I think that's like a really like, sort of added sort of pressure, like, call it sort of power. Because diamonds are created, through pressure. So I think like that's sort of what's allowed them to be even better. And the final thing I'll say is what I'm so proud to share. I've made 5 investments, and 4 of those relocated to Chicago. So like I have a team from Boston, I have a team from New York, I have another team, half of the founders in New York actually, and a team from Austin, Texas. So I don't want Chicago just to be a great place for Chicago founders. Like I want it to be a great place for all founders because of everything I alluded to earlier. And I think that we have a major platform shift on our hands right now with large language models and AI. Chicago was the birthplace of the first paper on neural networks. So we have the historical context. We have a shit ton of data in Chicago because we're such a diverse economy. We're one of the first cities to provide publicly open data as well. And data is the new gold. So I think that there are so many reasons why I want founders dreaming big, leveraging this technology in Chicago.
Before we go on to the next segment, I had a quick follow-up question. So would you say that if you were a founder right now, would you be at a disadvantage to build inside Chicago because the ecosystem isn't as developed yet? And also, how long would you say the flywheel effect takes before Chicago becomes a really successful startup ecosystem like Silicon Valley?
Yeah, great question. So we'll start with the latter of that. It takes big wins for sure. So there are companies today that I haven't invested in that are already sort of leveraging this mind or have this mindset as well. They're maybe in the waiting rooms to go public. Recently became unicorns. So I believe this flywheel effect is going to happen sooner rather than later. In fact, it's already sort of happening. Not at scale, but it's happening for sure. A lot of these companies. Tempest, a company founded in Chicago. I've spoken with a few people that are leaving to start their own companies, which is very exciting. We have a legal tech company I'm blanking on right now, but that's another example where a few of the early team and founders have left to start their own things, and so the flywheel effect is actually already happening at scale. I'd love for our companies to be a part of that sort of flywheel effect. So. It could happen anywhere from today to, when our early companies end up sort of going public and, getting up there, which is exciting. And then to your first question, no, I think from pre-seed to seed, early stage, you got to find ways to do more with less. $500,000, which we invest in our early stage companies, goes much further than Chicago than the coast. You're spending $500,000 on rent in San Francisco. It goes much further. And I think another thing, we have one of the it might be the highest concentration of engineers, graduating engineers in the Midwest. Just think about some of the schools that we have, UIUC, Purdue, Notre Dame, Carnegie Mellon. We have. We're constantly graduating high caliber engineers, which you're going to be able to bring onto your teams, for significantly less because of obviously the cost of living and everything in Chicago. And 80% of Midwest grads end up in Chicago too, which is pretty exciting. New data I just saw. So my point is, no, I would not say it's a disadvantage. I think that. COVID showed us anything, you could really build a company anywhere. And I think the mindset of founders today should be after the craziness of 2021 and 22, how can we do more with less?
So what kind of events do you host? So you have AI Tinkerers, you host that?
Yes, yeah.
AI Tinkerers is basically an event in Chicago, I think Jim Carter put it together.
Yep.
Where they invite people that are basically tinkering with AI and have companies and kind of present what you're building in that space. But are there any other events that you guys have?
Yeah, great research. So we have a lot of hackathons. We have a lot of co-working days, and AR Tinkers is sort of a new series we're rolling out. But overall, I'd say the theme of what we do as a Drive office is sort of we got to do less happy hours, not just in Chicago, across all tech. There's too many fucking happy hours. We got to do more hackathons and serious events. So we want serious people in our office, coming to our events, working, collaborating. We want serious people who are shooting for the stars, dreaming big, wanting to build massive companies, are sort of thinking about the technical aspects of their business. Even if I'm not technical, but I know that that would be sort of a first priority for me. I want to create those spaces for potential operators to find technical folks and start companies. And I think that like, yeah, hackathons are a great way to do that. Like people present their projects, create projects, and maybe that goes on and creates something bigger. So that's sort of the theme, like less happy hours, more hackathons. So we have a lot of like the, I guess, yeah, technical / serious gatherings that we have at the office. And then we do other things too. I mean, I have a music startup in the portfolio, and we got to host Vic Mensa's birthday at the office. So that was pretty cool because he's a user. So yeah, I sort of help my companies think of go-to-market and stuff like that too. It's awesome. And also, questions from V.
So you put the things Chicago like that from universities around Chicago.
Yes. Yeah, no, I try and spend as much time on university campuses as possible. A, to like meet with potential founders that we can invest in. B, to like not always have it be so transactional and like, be someone that you guys can call or email if you end up having an idea like weeks after I leave and like sort of want to pitch and talk. And C, like to look for talent for my companies as well. Yeah, I met with a pretty cool dev during a trip to UMich that I introduced to one of my AI infrastructure teams 2 weeks ago. So, and he's coming to visit next week. So I think, those are like the three things I used to do on college campuses. But I think that's a perfect plug to, what we're organizing. We're going to be putting together a Illinois student AI hackathon in Chicago in January. I believe we're going with January 19th, 20th, and 21st. But the whole point of this is to connect students from our major universities. So we're going to have UIUC, we're going to have UChicago, Northwestern, hopefully others. Put you guys together and, sort of come up with ideas or like maybe collaborate. And like it'd be so cool. Like, what if we had like a team of like, Northwestern, UChicago, and UIC? I mean, like that'd be badass. And you guys end up combining your talents and creating something. Because I think in the Bay you got like Stanford, Berkeley, Boston, you got like Harvard, MIT. Like, we have our three big schools, but I want to for sure like loop you guys into Chicago downtown more. And like we also need to. I spent a lot of time here, but like more people need to visit Champaign. But overall, to close on that, like you guys are always welcome to come to our office and hang out. We have sort of our co-working days often. I'm always inviting founders from my university trips to the office. I was just telling the last group I was doing Fireside for that I visited UMich 2 weeks ago, and I threw that invite out, and they were all like, "Yeah, okay, we'll come Monday." So they brought like a group of 20 like to the office on Monday, last Monday, which was awesome. I really mean it. Like you guys can totally come. Organize a field trip. I'll meet a few of our founders and like see the energy that I'm talking about.
And regarding the hackathon, we'll get more information about that soon as we finalize. So we're excited for that. So those are 3 buckets.
Those are the 3 buckets. Yeah. Awesome. Yes.
Do you have any normal
Yeah, no, not yet. I mean, they're going to come as they do. But yeah, no, I mean, I will say, no like notable failures, but like it's just been fun to like, how I thought about companies last year, or like the early investments I made, different than how I think today. Like we're funding a company this week that I investing in, and then my last company. Moving from New York, they're moving here on Saturday. But I was just sitting down with them in New York when I was there last week. And I'm like, wow, like it's nice to get reps and like sort of these experiences. And I think that's like where true success in venture comes, like repeating the same mistakes and being able to connect the dots and seeing what worked first time and what you do this differently this time. Like you got to move quick because the world moves very fast. No notable L's yet. Gotta say that. But even looking at the overall portfolio, like we're very specific when it comes to like building out our postmortems and like really understanding and breaking down like what went wrong, like what would we not do next time and not making that same mistake. No one is frowned upon for making mistakes. Like, mistakes are healthy, but making them twice really bad. Yes.
What do you think about the sentiment that's going around that AI is like starting to become oversaturated?
Yeah, no, I don't reject it at all. Like, I think we're for sure in a hype cycle, but like great companies are always started in hype cycles. You're always going to have sort of we're not really looking for needles and haystacks. That's the difficult part of it. Like, we're looking for needles and needle stacks. So it's sort of like I've had to find my own ways of like filtering out from the noise and, like having very like specific principles and like the fundamentals. Like, we were talking about this in the last group. Like, yeah, you should leverage new technology, blockchain, AI, whatever it is. But the fundamentals of building a business still matter. Like solving a massive problem for a specific group of people to start. Understanding like why this needs to be built today. Having a really clear idea of like how you want to take it to market. Like, that's been the case for decades. So slapping .ai onto your startup like doesn't, it's not going to change and solve everything. Like, you gotta, I think for sure, like, leverage it, know about it, but like even more important than that, you gotta like really know your end user, like how this is going to change their lives. So I think that that's a really important note. The fundamentals building a business are now like even more important. Yes.
What's the number one thing that you personally look at when you're deciding whether or not to invest in a fund?
Storytellers and like cerebral thinkers. So people who like know what they know and know what they don't know. They really can answer all those questions I just mentioned of like why this needs to be built today and what is your unique insight. People sort of like, because I meet with so many founders a day, like, like they have a very unique insight that like almost feels like a secret that like the market hasn't really recognized yet. And they could really articulate that in a clear way. And it might be against the grain of like, what everybody else is doing. So to your point, sort of like, you got a lot of people doing the same thing. And, you sort of know like the ones that are thinking differently about these problems. Like Bricks AI, my AI infrastructure company, recognized that everybody's using these LLMs in the chatbot, and they were all like, "What if we pulled actual computing power out of them, and like actually provided infrastructure to enterprises?" So they're doing unique AI tooling, leveraging these existing LLM models for mainly devs right now. But yeah, I mean, like that was sort of like the trigger. It's like, oh shit, like yeah, thinking differently than everybody else. That's something that we look for. So storytellers. Because like once you have that sort of unique insight, how do you like share that? And then what I mean by cerebral thinkers are like people who like, don't just run off of a bunch of assumptions. I think like they're testing in the market. Like they find data from speaking to end users and potential customers, and that's sort of helping shape the direction of what they're building. So yeah, not so assumption based. I think is like the other thing.
So you mentioned how like you haven't had any roles in the VC space, and also like before that, how everything that you did kind of just transformed into something else. That became but was there anything was there anything before that was treated like a dead end? You had to back up completely.
Yeah, that's a tough question because I mean, maybe in the moment, like yeah, I could say things don't make that much sense, but like now connecting everything, it's like oh yeah, okay, like that little stint at Nordstrom, because I couldn't get an internship, like gave me cool experience, like on the floor, like understanding customer service in a whole new way. I mean, like yeah, that seemed like a waste of time in the moment, but like sort of yeah. I mean, I think connecting the dots, like looking back, it's like everything sort of. I stopped saying everything happens for a reason and more just sort of like, it's sort of like shit happens and like it's what you make of it. Like, that's sort of, that's been my path. So yeah, no, I don't think so. I mean, like for sure, like there have been difficult moments, like everything I've done. I mean, every day is difficult. It's my current job, but like, I'm not quitting, like just find another way. you mentioned like the storytelling ability, the cerebral thinkers. I want teams that have like technical prowess. Start to kind of experiment and like, so and that's the advantage of starting to local word move fast or the larger companies and incumbents. So you need someone that can build on your team. I want folks that are coachable as well. I mean, that's something I always look for. I think, yeah, there are other things too, but I mean, like for the most part, like those are the four sort of like important things. And then adding to that, like it's got to be an area that we spend a lot of time in. Those are for the most part all public, but it usually takes me meeting with the team first to sort of like say if we have a thesis in the space or not, or we're actively looking at that space. But yeah, I mean, those two like great combo, for like why invest. And it's going to be different across all industries, the stage of where a company is for sure.
To that point, real quick, do you think founders are like born, or would you say there's like certain skills you can learn to like fit those categories? Would you say it's like an innate skill and some people have, some people don't, or is it more of like a learned thing, like having that cerebral vision, like being able to like tell what's going on?
Yeah, that's a good question. I mean, personally, I think everything can be taught, and yeah, I mean, some of us are like born with different skill sets than others, but for the most part, like we're all born with like a clean slate, and like it's like these things that we experience that like maybe we don't fully recognize, like will play a big part in our lives, like that we see growing up, or that we do adolescence or in our 20s, and then that sort of adds to the reason that we're probably better at doing something than others. But for the most part, I mean, I feel like everything can be taught. All these skills can be picked up, learned, and that's why like it really starts by you like understanding what your skill set is and getting to that point. Okay, what am I amazing at? What am I not? Because if you're missing certain skills, that's when you find someone to complement those skills, and that's why we invest in teams. Usually, not really solo founders. I haven't invested in a solo founder, and I would argue that Drive hasn't. I don't think maybe like one or two, but none that I can think of. Like it's always been a team. It's always been like a team of 2 to 3 that have complementary skills.
How do you think founders can find those suitable co-founders?
Yeah, well, that's where the storytelling starts. Like before you get an investment, before you expect to tell your story like to users and customers and acquiring those. Like I think storytelling when it comes to hiring, it's like one of the most important skill sets to like start with. And I think solo founders should for sure hire their co-founder. And to do that, you got to like really paint a clear vision to them, like where you're going and like why they should not take that job offer and join you. So yeah, I mean, and where to find them? I mean, different places, but that's the reason why I host a lot of gatherings, like to connect folks. And like if I was a founder today, solo founder, like I'd be hitting up every room. Like I'd be just like in these spaces, like looking for someone, searching for someone, not going with the first pick. Like I would treat it like a job interview, and maybe look for people who are already doing that work. So yeah, I would totally treat it like sort of you're hiring your co-founder. Oh, awesome. Thank you. Yeah, appreciate you, man.
Yeah, any other questions?
Since you're bullish on AI right now, do you have any strong opinions about competitive mode? It seems like a lot of sort of building
Yeah, I've changed my opinion on this a few times. I honestly feel like just with how fast the world is moving right now, like I mean, our best founders, our best early founders, like are ones that sort of like maybe spend like 2-3 weeks heads down, like building, and then like they sort of peak up and like look at sort of like what incumbents are building, what the industry is doing, and like there might be opportunities for you to like integrate and like collaborate with like larger companies, so, like especially if you're able to like specifically like build for a very specific use case or acute pain point or a specific end user. Like with bringing in that audience, like sometimes that could be like the greatest. So I think yeah, it's difficult, like because I've been seeing like a lot of these companies, a lot of these companies just like create these ideas instantly, which is why I think like it starts by sort of thinking different, doing what other people aren't, but yeah, not being afraid to collaborate if you get that opportunity.
Is your philosophy then more focused on the founders themselves?
Yes, you have to, because also like it's okay to say like the companies we invest in today, yeah, it's a very calculated bet and a thesis, but like things are gonna change. Companies pivot all the time. So at the end of the day, like what doesn't change? The team.
Kind of regarding that AI question, how has AI itself helped venture capital, thinking out and using data to see who is better successful?
Yeah, cool question. So we have an internal database called Herbie that we built. We have a little software team that worked on it. That like is like an AI sort of tool that connects to all of our inboxes and like a bunch of data sources, PitchBook, LinkedIn, that will surface like new companies for us every week during our investment meetings. So that's how we use it. I am looking for companies that like are not company like before they're even companies. So sometimes it's rare to find in surface companies from Herbie for me personally, but like the other stages I drive for sure use that all the time. Yeah, so that's how we use it internally. We are like a data-driven venture firm. I think we're seeing a lot more data-driven venture firms get created, which is great. And like how does it benefit the overall industry? Like this is just it's another major platform shift that a lot of investors, a lot of founders that I've interviewed on my show, sort of saying that like this is the most exciting I've seen since the beginning of the internet. I know we hear that a lot, but like this is one of those eras where like companies that get started today, or come in the future, like will be sort of beyond our imagination. Like we're gonna see things that like, we couldn't have even comprehended. Similar to like what it did during the internet era. Like no one could have imagined sort of some of the companies we have today. So I think, like, that excitement should like fuel everybody's ambition to like say, damn, like I can flip a business model on its head. Like I don't have to create something that like has existed before. Like you could literally, sky's the limit for sure. But that's exciting. Yes. Yeah. So today, like to my point of like founders gonna be able to do more with less. Today, I don't think like I would invest like an AI agent like as a CTO. Like you sort of need someone like on your team currently that can do that. Maybe like someone that can handle marketing functions and like a few other roles. Like I think like have some opportunities to like leverage this technology instead of someone completely new onto the team. But who knows? I mean, the world might get to a place where like autonomous agent is like that good to code, etc. That seems to be where the world's going. But for the most part now, like I'm not even like of sort of the thought that like an AI like sure it will create new jobs, replace jobs, but like I see it more as like a tool to like make people better at like what they do. Like the co-pilot sort of as philosophy is one that I'm really excited about. Like the Jarvis sort of environment, giving everybody a Jarvis, make people faster, stronger, more efficient on what they do. So maybe like a CTO that leverages that technology, that would be something that people beside us, because you don't just have to use AI to like please your end user. Like you could also use it internally, make yourself think it's better, faster. But I don't know if we're at the point yet. Like we usually like to see teams that like have someone technical, and then to the earlier point that I made, like all those folks are out there. Like, how many of you guys are technical? Yeah, so it's easy to like kind of find these folks and like sort of hire your first technical co-founder or like lead, and it really starts by inspiring that person first. Yeah, so that's what I would do. Again, I'm not technical. I've tried. I've done a few coding boot camps, but like I would not be the CTO. I would find someone that I could build alongside. Yes.
So at what point should someone come to you and say, like, hey, I have an idea and I'm ready to pitch? And then in addition to that, I wanted to ask, so you said you guys use data when looking at companies. What are some of the data points you look at for a company, and in addition to like the qualities of the founder?
Yes. So what to do before? You know, it really varies. There's no like right answer to this. But I will say like you've done two things. Like you've done a fair amount of your own diligence on which firms to reach out to, so you're not just reaching out to random firms. And then also you've done everything possible up until like you need to fund the business to like get to the next round. Like you to like prove out a lot of these ideas. So like yeah, you should know exactly who you want to hire and like who you need to bring onto the team. And then, of course, we need to fund the company to bring those folks on. Or like you should know exactly the experiments that you want to run, you know, and sort of like how you want to go to market. Some of that costs money to do. So like that is sort of like how we, you know, do that at scale. Slash, I mean, yeah, like you need to really know that you need to want to do this full time. You know, I don't want anybody to, you know, live off ramen noodles and sort of, you know, have a difficult time doing, you know, what they do or can do as a founder. So like being able to really know that you want to do that and sort of fund it to go to founder salaries, etc. So thankfully, I mean, you know, we take care of office space, you know, for founders, but there are other things that do cost money. So trying to like answer all those unanswered questions first, like how many customers have you spoken with to like really understand that this is something that we care about, and mapping out everything else till sort of all the layers of risk are peeled back as much as they will be for a pre-seed investment. And then it's the same thing for the pre-seed to seed. It's like, okay, like we, you know, spent money on this, on these results, hit these milestones. Okay, like more risk has been peeled back, but there's still a shit ton of risk for the business. Okay, so now it's Series A, and so on and so on. As for data points, I mean, yeah, no, it varies. We take a lot of data, you know, on our teams, like our successful teams, to sort of see, you know, like what early hires they made that were most effective to their businesses, you know, what spaces they're in, you know, sort of, yeah, founder qualities to your point. Like I'd say Luis from Duolingo is probably our best founder. Like he just really, well, now it's a public company. I mean, so obviously he's one of our best, but I mean, just really knows how to hire just the right folks, you know, for different functions at his company, and you know, just his unwillingness to fail, and just his ambitious thinking is always there. So yeah, there are a lot of sort of breadcrumbs that we try and find in founders, you know, sort of his background, where he came from, etc. So yeah, a lot of different data points that we're pulling on our teams and also have, and like data on the Midwest as well. To know about like how many engineering students are less, like what industry do we focus on, why this is still such a great bet to make. I mean, yeah, like founder beef. I've been lucky. Drastic, but like, yeah, I mean, yeah, just not knowing who you're going into business with. The fear of like not experimenting as well, and like getting too sort of anxious about like the market and blah blah blah. Like, just build. So people that like take their foot off the gas. I don't think that's just a young student thing, but I mean, I think that it for sure happens, you know, a lot. You know, I've seen founders get a little too anxious about market conditions, which is all, yeah, it's important to have an ear to the streets, but for the most part, like, yeah, like, you don't have a rocket ship yet. Like, nothing is built. Like, this is the time to just, like, be heads down, you know, build. I've seen founders get distracted, early founders, I think, like, maybe with a lot of the glitz and glam, and, yeah, they want to be founders for the wrong reasons. So to the point I was making earlier, like, yeah, really making sure that, like, you're answering all these questions first, internally, you know, with yourself, to make sure that you are, you know, right for this. But you got to believe in yourself before other people believe in you. Yes.
Based on a lot of what you've done from Chicago, visiting all the universities, on students.
Yes. Yeah, totally.
why them and why not others with more experience?
Yeah, no, great question. So we do all we invest in we don't discriminate, like founders of all different shapes and sizes, ages, whatever. I am not just looking for Gen Z, but for the most part, I really like spending my time on college campuses and like looking for young founders. And I just think that some of the greatest companies that have been created, and a lot of them were from young folks. And just the I don't know if it's like blind ambition, but like yeah, a lot of these young students have like the run through walls mentality. I can do it all. I can do anything. And they're maybe against sort of the system or ways of how it's being done currently. And I think you reach a certain age, it's like, okay, I've been doing the same routine forever, and things sort of have to be done like this. And I'm just like, wow, it's fun working with Gen Zs like myself because I my crazy ambition is to build Chicago up, and we're gonna make it happen. It's very bullish on that because we're putting action into place. Are not satisfied. And I say we, thrive, and there are a lot of other young folks in Chicago with the same sort of mentality as mine. We're not satisfied with where the city is right now. You could make it much better. And that's where it starts. It starts with people just really coming together to think bigger, different than everybody else. And I just think a lot of young people have that. And I think that's a rarity of Chicago. I think a lot of our quote unquote leaders in the city, left/went to the burbs over COVID. And they sort of passed the baton over to a lot of young people, which is so cool. You got a lot of people my age, in similar positions that are sort of saying where the city should go and doing things in real time to make it happen. I think that's the rare thing of Chicago. You don't really have to wait your turn in line. If you want to make change, you can just do it right away. So yeah, my good friend put on the first Chicago Tech Week, and it's 3 years in a row now, and it's getting bigger every year. So that's special. Friend Megan put together the first Gen Z VC conference in Chicago, and she's expanding that now to other cities as well, which is really exciting. I could give a lot of other examples, but I mean, there's just a lot of young energy, and the older folks in Chicago respect it. Yeah, okay, yeah, sure. Let's mix it up.
I guess I have one more question. So I read a blog post from yours a couple of days ago about the creator economy, just how it has a bunch of potential, how everyone's gonna be a creator in the future. Can you talk a little bit more about I guess your experience with the creator economy, your bets on it, and I guess where you see it becoming in 5 or 10 years?
Yeah. I think that whenever we are curious about an individual or want to learn more about them, your first stop is LinkedIn. Your first stop is sort of the internet. It's not even the creator economy. It's just the current economy. We interact with the internet every day. We're building our brands every day in one way or another. Treating these platforms as our system of records. Instagram is sort of the system of record of my memories. LinkedIn is sort of the system of record of what someone's done with their life. So we use these platforms so much, and I think as someone who is a curator, I've kind of moved away from the word creator. As someone who's a curator, it's brought a lot of value to me personally to share information, attract the right people, founders that I should be looking at, etc., and share my thoughts, sort of these different spaces. A space specifically within the creator economy that I'm really interested in though is music and super fandom. I think the music industry is one of these rare spaces where the largest company is arguably Spotify. And I feel like Spotify is really sort of gatekept the industry from growing in many different ways. I related it to a blog post to the Kodak sort of mentality where Kodak created the first digital camera, and they decided not to release it because they were afraid it was going to spark a whole new sort of industry and cannibalize their business. And I think Spotify does something very similar. Instead of really honing in on music, they got into podcasting and audiobooks. And I feel like there's so much more potential in music to really help musicians, creators, create businesses and monetize and unlock new revenue. And super fandom, which we learned about a lot of cameos. I think it's going to be a huge way to do that. 20% of every musician's fans are their super fans, and they account for over 80% of the revenue that they make. So I think that if you really know who your super fans are and know how to monetize them, you can turn a fan, just a passive streamer and listener, those artists get like pennies from each stream, into a customer, someone who's going to like purchase your swag or go to your shows that you can engage with in different ways. So that was the music company I invested in. It's like helping these musicians discover who their top fans are across all platforms so they can monetize it more. But I'm hoping that like there could be more power that goes in the hands of creators, musicians, and I think a lot of it's going to be done from having them leverage this data in all new ways and like providing them with actual insights or AI, what they should do to activate those top fans and turn them into customers.
Do you have any special stories about like how your personal brand, maybe your Twitter or anything, like led to some insane connection or like insane meeting that you wanted to have otherwise?
I mean, the whole like podcast for the most part, like those were all, even if it like started with a cold email, like those were all folks that like maybe heard of me or like they had a friend that joined the show and like it was made for an easier sell to get them on. Yeah, there were so many examples. I always forget about them. But, like, yeah, just cool people that like retweeted or liked to engage with my content. Like I had a crazy, or I thought it was like sort of a unpopular opinion tweet one time. I forget. I gotta find it. But a bunch of people were like arguing that like, no, that's not how you do it. That's not how you do it. And then the co-founder of Netflix just like quote tweeted it and like said, no, this is the way to do it, and this is how I did it. I'm forgetting what it was, but I thought that was pretty cool. Yeah. But yeah, many other things have happened.
Nice. Do you have any tips on like building your brand online? How to like get your message out there? Like how to find people with similar interests and like
Pick your platforms or platform. Start and be consistent. I think it's my greatest advice. Podcasting. I mentioned that stat earlier that 90% of shows quit after episode 3. I knew that going into it, so like I was very methodical about like pre-planning like episodes and like before I announced the podcast or like published any episode, I had like 8 episodes fully edited, fully recorded, fully ready to go, just waiting in a Google folder. So that just in case, like I had a guest that I had to skip, like I had episodes to go. I do the same thing with my newsletter. Like I release it every Monday, so it's a pretty high frequency to type that up. So I'm not just typing it up on Sundays, like I'm sort of starting it throughout the week, sharing insights, and then publish it like Saturday. So, or schedule to publish on Saturday. So like just, knowing how you have to be consistent and it can be at times suck at times. Trying to like stay ahead. Probably the most important thing. You don't have to do it weekly, by the way, but no matter what, if it's bi-weekly, monthly, you even got to be consistent with that. I think that's sort of advice I've learned. And I think a great moat for early companies is to like build a strong community of folks that love what you're doing and are obsessed with what you're doing. And I think just where the world has gone and is going, people no longer like just care about the product; they care about who's behind the product, and they want to really know like who's building it and why. So being able to share your thoughts publicly and like finding your minimal viable community that you can turn into a sort of customer base, I think is huge.
do you have any favorite creators or like any favorite companies that do a good job of like building in public and like making sure to kind of like showcase the people behind the company as well? Like any examples we can point to?
Yeah, I mean, I think Rex Woodbury and Bill Gurley, 2 different generations, but like both pretty much do the same thing. Just with how they share their content online. They're both investors. Those are 2 that I've sort of been inspired by. As for companies, I mean, gosh, like Elon, like, sometimes it's a little too transparent, but like, he's kind of built like the community of folks that are obsessed with what he does. And you can do that at a smaller scale for sure. But I mean, you kind of got to point to that one. So, don't agree with everything he says and does, but I mean, the fact that Tesla like didn't have a marketing department, and like I don't think they still do. Like he's the marketing department. Like I think that's pretty badass.
Any other questions from anyone?
Listen, I think you already answered this earlier. But like on the topic of LLMs and AI, you see like a bunch of startups every week, new ones using AI in one way or the other. Hitting like the same endpoint and just gathering different sort of sectors of data. So like something in housing or something in food and something in commodities. But like there's nothing proprietary about it, right? Like it's all just one layer that you've made and it's all getting the sort of same component at the back end. So is that something truly that you would invest in, especially in the long term? Is that something worth building?
Yeah. So
Like that's it.
we look at a few different areas in AI. You know, we'll do the applications, the fine tuning models, infrastructure, and like security, which I actually think is probably like one of the big problems that needs to be solved for a lot of enterprises before they allow their employees to use a lot of these models. Like, you know, Motorola, their employees are not allowed to use ChatGPT because, like, you know, the security issues. Like you're just sort of training data that, you know, is proprietary. And Reddit even is sort of like about to like halt all you know, training on their data unless they start getting paid significantly for it. So to answer your question, yeah, I think that it's something that we would look at for sure, because the end user, like for the most part, like doesn't care like what the back end looks like. You know, they just want like the best result. And the larger the model, the more parameters doesn't mean it's better by any means, or more curated for that end user. So yeah, you know, like a lot of my founders, or these bricks that's building AI infrastructure, like they can switch out different LLMs like, as they please. Like it doesn't matter. Like a large sort of reason for why bricks needs to exist is because they want to limit AI hallucinations. That's sort of when you like, you know, get a result that like makes no sense, and make AI like much more curated and hyper specific to the end user. So I mean, I think that's going to be like a really important factor. But yeah, to your point, like infrastructure, like if you're an application, you know, it varies if it really matters or not. I think what's more important is like how you're tuning and like sort of the data input that you're getting to make it as curated as possible. So there's that, I'll say, and then also with how connecting this to my whole community thing, data is the new gold. Like data is going to be so important to get out your customer. Like you're gonna really have to earn their trust in order to do that. So I think I would recommend really thinking about or being intentional with like how you build community and like build that trust with your user base so that you can get access to their data. Okay. I gotta drive back, but I can take one more question. Awesome. Well, this was a lot of fun. Sorry I do a lot of this. I hope I shared some good insights. My email is landon@drivecapital.com in case you guys ever want to chat. If you're ever in Chicago, please stop by our office. You're welcome to come work. I got a lot of space. And then my newsletter is thedrivechicago.com, where I share all my cool insights. And then Twitter, Landon20s. I think that's it.